All right, we are recording, we are live. This is the third to the last session of the year and the third to the last session of the book. I don't know how in the world we're going to finish this in 3 sessions, but we're going to see how close we get. We may find that the last session of the year is a speed reading session. We're just going to finish this sucker and you can talk about it at the end if you want to. We really want to try to get through this. So we're going to start on page 129, just at the bottom, just to back up 1 paragraph from last week. And then so we can have a running start at this. We are in the chapter he's called Shadowlands, and he's dealing with the shadow side of ourselves, which we covered in the book Owning Your Own Shadow by Robert Johnson, 2 books back, I think it was. And so he's talking about in the second half of life, this really is the work that we're doing in many ways, is facing our shadow side. And we're going to find out more about what that actually is as the chapter progresses. So we're in about 3 pages. We hit this chapter last week, just the beginning of it. And so we're going to pick it up on the bottom of page 129. Before we do, is there anything, any old business, anything that anyone wants to bring up? Get off your chest. Stuff that you've been thinking about last week. Hold over from last week. All right, looks like a clean palette then. Okay, here we go. Right at the bottom. And he's been talking about our self-image. He's been talking about what that actually is, the difference between the self-image, the persona that we project, as opposed to our true self. So the first half of life is dealing with the persona. The first half of life is dealing with the self-image that we create or is created for us when we are kids and in our families of origin, and the core values that we collect as we're trying to survive in childhood, the dysfunctions and whatever we have to face in our early years in our homes of origin, as contrasted with the true self that we will be uncovering in the second half of life work, if we are willing to, as he says, shadow box, if we're willing to actually confront the shadow, bring it out, find ways to exorcise it, either through symbol and ritual and different ways of being able to deal with it. And then the sadness and the difficulty that brings with it as we confront those parts of ourselves that we have been hiding successfully for the most part, for most of our lives. This is the part of ourselves we don't want to show. This is the part of ourselves that we repress, we deny its existence, and we project this persona of what we think that we would like to show the rest of the world. So he says at the bottom of 129, your self-image is not substantial or lasting. It is just created out of your own mind, desire, and choice, and everybody else's preferences for you. It floats around in Plato's unreal world of ideas. It is not objective at all, but entirely subjective, which does not mean that it does not have real influence. The movement to second half of life wisdom has much to do with necessary shadow work and the emergence of healthy self-critical thinking, which alone allows you to see beyond your own shadow and disguise and to find who you are hidden with Christ in God, as Paul puts it in Colossians 3. The Zen masters call it the face you had before you were born. This self cannot die and always lives and is your true self. Now, I've been talking about it in the last few times at that on Sundays as vanquishing the ego, but it's the same thing that we're talking about here. We're talking about being able to get back to this face we had before we were born. Who were we when we were children? Who were we up until we were around 8 or 9, when really the ego starts to take over? That's who we want to try to get back to and understand what that actually means from the perspective of a mature adult, right? As Jesus puts it, you must recognize the plank in your own eye, and only then will you see clearly enough to take the splinter out of your brother or sister's eye. He also said, the lamp of the body is the eye. Spiritual maturity is largely a growth in seeing, and full seeing seems to take most of our lifetime, with a huge leap in the final years, months, weeks, and days of life, as any hospice volunteer will tell you. There seems to be a cumulative and exponential growth in seeing in people's last years, for those who do their inner work. There is also a cumulative closing down in people who have denied all shadow work and humiliating self-knowledge. That's a great adjective there, humiliating self-knowledge. Watch the Nuremberg trials and see Nazi men who killed millions still in total denial and maintenance of their moral self-image till the very end. I'm sure you all know examples of both these types. So what he's called seeing, we've been calling awareness. That contemplative work is really about awareness building our awareness, building our ability to be fully present to the moment and to see what is really there, not only objectively around us, but also within, to be able to see clearly how we are relating, the choices that we make, how this moment is unfolding. And all of this is part of the second half of life work, and it's also contemplative work. It's also Jesus' way and everything else we've been talking about. He's going to expand on this idea of humiliation here. Shadow work is humiliating work, but properly so. If you do not eat such humiliations with regularity and make friends with the judges, the courtrooms, and the officers, that is, all those who reveal to you and convict you of your own denied faults, who come into your life, you will surely remain in the first half of life forever. We never get to the second half of life without major shadowboxing. And I am sorry to report that it continues until the end of life. The only difference being that you are no longer surprised by your surprises or so totally humiliated by your humiliations. You come to expect various forms of half-heartedness, deceit, vanity, or illusions from yourself, but now you are seen through them, which destroys most of their game and their power. So he's doing a little midrash on Matthew 5. If you turn back a couple of pages to the beginning of the chapter, that second epigraph there is Matthew 5, starting at verse 25. Make friends with your opponent quickly while he is taking you to court, or he will hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the officer, and the officer will throw you into prison. You will not get out until you have paid the last penny. So he's taking this from a literal understanding to a highly figurative one. So when he says over here, back on page 131, shadow work is humiliating work, but properly so. If you do not eat such humiliations with regularity and make friends with the judges, the courtrooms, and the officers, that is, all those who reveal to you and convict you of your own denied faults who come into your life, you will surely remain in the first half of life forever. So he's taking that saying of Jesus, which had a practical meaning in terms of human interrelations. You know, if two people get to the point where one is suing the other, he's saying before you get to the courtroom, make friends with this person so you don't have to go through this process. What Rohr is taking this into a spiritual realm and saying, yes, we need to make friends with those who are suing us, with the judges and the courtrooms and everything, because those are the ones who are revealing to us our own faults, revealing to us the problems that we've been denying, the issues that we've been denying all our lives, that shadow self. Because until we confront it, until we let it play through, until we accept that it's part of us and balance it with the positive shadow, we are going to remain in the first half of life forever, continuing to project this persona. Is this all making sense from a psychological and also from a spiritual point of view? Any questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah, I have my other support group, so we're doing step 4. And this is what I'm seeing is as, truthful moral inventory of us. And I think that that's exactly what it is. So my question to them is, yes, because we have denials, it's we protect ourselves through denials, and it's hidden. So I'm saying, if it's hidden, how can I recognize it? Because I'm protecting myself. Then it takes other people, that humiliating part of it. but then the people I'm with are very diplomatic. And then I get, oh, is that my flaw? Or okay. I recognize in the first half, right? If they tell me the brutal honesty and truth, I might get defensive. So how do I recognize my flaws in myself if I still have these defenses? How does one break it down? How does one recognize?
And that's not a rhetorical question. You're really asking, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Anybody? How do we start to recognize the parts of ourselves that are unconscious? I mean, that's the whole point of the shadow, right? We don't know it until it's revealed to us.
I know for me, it's when I look at how offendable I am, or how when I get defensive or try to explain or justify my behavior, that's a clue to me that there's something underneath that I need to take a look at. That's how it's hard when you know I'm in that state of defensiveness or being offended or hurt by what somebody says to me, because that's the last thing I want to do. But it's that underlying reaction that's pointing me to something that I'm needing to take a look at. Best I can do.
That's great. You know, we always talk about being unoffendable here, right? Unoffendable and unflatterable, and to really pay attention to what does offend you and your offenses, because that's telling you something. You know, your negative emotions that spike. You know, the emotion.
That has to do with how it's written. It says that we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And as I understand, step 4 in your 12-step program is a 12-step program. Is that correct? Okay. Then once we list those, then we share that with a mentor or a sponsor, if you will, and then there are columns, and then that fourth column is my part in it, and it makes me unoffendable, if you will. I know that my experience with that was that that I opened myself and became ready and made that inventory. I shared that with my sponsor. He he said, make another column. And he said, what's your part in it? And then so that was final part in it for me, in that I had to look inside and be honest with myself about what truly my part was, and not to say that what I did was wrong or bad. It was just my part. And you know, my part, as I see it, my part does not equate to my fault. My part equates to, it's like when you're dancing, doing ballroom dancing. You know, you got what for the guys, you have the right hand in the middle of her back, and the left, her right hand in your hand up here, and that's your part. And I just don't. That has helped me to become unoffendable, taking an honest look at who I am. I get the feeling that's what they're perhaps looking for here.
Okay, so for those of us who are not part of a 12-step group, or for those of us more at the beginning of the process, because what we're talking about here is a certain amount of self-awareness that kicks in that allows us to be able to process the way John is talking about, and even the way Judy is talking about. you know, that you've already got a certain amount of awareness. Our job at the very, very beginning of the process is to become more and more aware, which is to slow down and start practicing the 4 S's: silence, solitude, stillness, simplicity. As we start to do that, as we quiet down, certain things are going to start to become more aware, or we're going to become more aware of them. They're going to start becoming more obvious to us. And one of the things that'll become obvious is these emotions that are constantly spiking with us. And the emotions are like warning lights on your dashboard telling you there's something wrong under the hood, that we need to start taking a look and paying attention. And as we start paying attention more to that, then we start to see some of these core issues that we're dealing with. And then we're going to be able to really hear what other people are telling us, to not become as defensive, as John says, to become less offendable. As things are being mirrored back to us, or we're being critiqued, we will enter freely into accountability relationships and partnerships, so that we can get this feedback. We'll be seeking it out. And so it starts to feed on itself. But at the very beginning, it's a process of becoming more aware and paying attention to where our thoughts go, where our emotions are spiking, and seeing where that is coming from, so that we can find the underlying causes. But it is a process, and we have to start someplace.
So are you saying that to do this reflection, you need to have another person to give you that feedback, or else you're not going to budge from where you are, maybe?
You know, it's going to be certainly easier with a feedback partner. And if we are living in community like we're supposed to be, we are going to have those feedback partners kind of organically. It's not like we have to make them formal arrangements. We can do that if we want to, but just in the everyday relationship, especially with the people whose toothbrushes are hanging side by side with ours, if we're paying attention to them and the quality of our relationship with them and the effect that we're having on them, we're going to start to get this feedback as well. And so it's going to happen naturally if we're paying attention, and then we can become more formal, like John is talking about. And I know Judy's experience comes from also 12-step work as well. And so it can be both.
Dave, I would first want to add that I think what you said was kind of spot on, because I have experienced that too, and I've seen that in other people, where the defensiveness or the offendability of someone, clearly it means something's going on underneath. But I would also add too that I think for me, sometimes fear, that can be an awareness for me. Like if I find myself running away from a situation, or not wanting to take this risk that I should be taking, or disconnecting myself from something or someone, I'm pulling back. And then, that's one way that I might kind of catch myself and say, wow, what is going on? I should be doing this. Why am I running away from this? Or what am I so afraid of? There's something going on underneath. I mean, so that in addition to the offendability, I would add maybe like fear kind of, and that takes a physical toll. I can get like a sweat and just go, ooh, I'm feeling something that's kind of uneasy here, and I'm reacting to something. What's going on with me?
And I think the point about having a trusted other, in your life, whether that's a spouse, a partner, a best friend, a sponsor, hopefully, if you pick the right one, they can help you, because I think you can hit a wall where, it takes a lot of awareness to start to see when you've had a conflict with someone, what your part is in that conflict. And oftentimes, I spent my whole work life having blind spots, and no one ever really had the courage to give me feedback about where I was getting off target or off track with this other person. And it was only when I found my way to a 12-step program and a sponsor that I did trust. Boy, she was the best blend of both encouragement, support, listening to, when I was all charged up about a situation or circumstance, she could hear that. And then once she diffused a lot of my high emotion, she could move me into, okay, let's take a look at how did you contribute to this? What is your part in it? And she did that with compassion and honesty, true honesty. And I was able, to further my awareness of me and my pattern and where that was coming from, in terms of my roots and my history and all of that. So, but Kathy is right. I mean, fear can be a big component of this too, that causes our reactions.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And obviously, a therapist, a counselor, a spiritual director, these are all this is the role that they would play, along with a sponsor and a trusted friend. And so that's why we would enlist the help of people like this, who are good listeners and can help reflect back what is going on, so that we can start to become more and more aware of it, so that we can then start to self-diagnose.
Yeah.
What is this I'm feeling right now? Oh, what is that emotion? Why is it here? What is it revealing about that unfinished business that's still under the radar there? I mean, that's the process, but we got to get to the place where we have that kind of awareness in real time to be able to do that and continue the process of shadow boxing. The point he's going to make in a page or two is that it never ends. The stone is never fully smooth. There's always going to be something left to process in this life. And so that is the continual refining that we can do as we move through the process of second half living.
This second half process is bringing up a lot of things for me that I wasn't aware of. And I think I like what you said, that there, I guess you were saying there's parts of you that you didn't see and people brought that up to you. I forget the exact term that you used, but when I started recognizing these new things that are old things, it's like I don't have access to talk to people per se. This isn't something that I need to go see a therapist about, because it's something I'm recognizing that is I can see where it's affected my whole life, from young to old, but there's no hurt, there's no wounding that I feel. I know I did at the time. So my approach to it is very different than what it has been in the past. So I've just been taking my own notes, kind of trying to do my own reflection, and yeah, I have to push myself at times, because I blank out. When I don't want to know it and I don't want to see it, or I don't want to understand it, I just go blank. and I didn't recognize to what degree I did that in my whole life. So it's kind of funny. I mean, like I was saying, it's something I'm going to learn a lot about as I go deeper, but it's not a negative thing.
That's perfect, Tony. Absolutely perfect. Yeah.
I would like to add something that perhaps those who are not 12-steppers, and that is that, when you're sharing those thoughts in that 4-step, and again, the 4-step said that we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. We share that with someone else, a trusted person, sponsor, spiritual advisor, whatever. It's not for them to pass judgment, and there's little, if any, passing of judgment, and a lot of times I've seen in my experience where people have feared being judged harshly, and that doesn't happen in a 12-step scenario. So I just wanted to add that.
Good, John. Thank you. Okay, let's press on a little bit and see what other light can be shed. In the next paragraph, he says, Odysseus had to face his same poor judgment again and again. He and others suffered much because of it. Yet he usually seemed to learn from his shadow side too. Some call this pattern the discovery of the golden shadow because it carries so much enlightenment for the soul. The general pattern in story and novel is that heroes learn and grow from encountering their shadow, whereas villains never do. Invariably, the movie and novels that are most memorable show real character development and growing through shadow work. This inspires us all because it calls us all. We all identify with our persona so strongly when we are young that we become masters of denial and learn to eliminate or deny anything that doesn't support it. Neither our persona nor our shadow is evil in itself. They just allow us to do evil and not know it. That's a great line. Neither our persona nor our shadow is evil in itself. They just allow us to do evil and not know it. Our shadow self makes us all into hypocrites at some level. Remember, hypocrite is a Greek word that simply means actor, someone playing a role rather than being real. We are all in one kind of closet or another and are even encouraged by society to play our roles. Usually everybody else can see your shadow, so it is crucial that you learn what everybody else knows about you except you. I've used the analogy of Indian poker. Anybody of you ever play Indian poker? Okay, you put all the cards down and then you got a couple up, and then the last card you lick and you stick to your forehead without looking at it. So everybody else at the table can see your card on your forehead, but you can't see it. And this just reminds me, everybody else can see your card. Everybody else can see your shadow. Just like we can see the unfinished parts of other people a lot more easily than we'll ever be able to see ourselves, right? And so this is the whole process of it. If we will listen to other people, if we will watch their reactions to our choices and to the way that we go about relationship and our tasks, we can start to learn a lot about what that card is that's stuck to our forehead that we can't see. And so it's really important to, as we develop this awareness, to have that aspect to our ability to be watching the effect that we have on other people, and then get some inclination of what that card is on our forehead. This idea about hypocrites too, that our shadow self makes us all into hypocrites, because a hypocrite is a Greek word that means actor, someone playing a role. In other words, we're playing the role of our persona rather than the role of ourself. I would just like to say that a real hypocrite is someone who intentionally knows what they're doing while they're doing it. If you're not aware that you're playing a role, well, you may be a sinner in the sense that you're missing the mark of real unity and connection, but you're not really a hypocrite. I think a hypocrite is someone who intentionally knows that they're playing a role and they're doing it for a particular purpose to gain some sort of advantage, usually, you know. But that's the other thing. We have to become aware of what we're doing before we can make a change. And in a very real way, we have to be aware of what we're doing before we're really culpable for doing it. Now, we may be legally culpable, of course, but remember what Jesus said from the cross: Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. They literally didn't know what they're doing. Not only did they not know what they were doing, but they thought what they were doing was righteous. This is the perversity of it, right? Our shadow can get so twisted, and we've denied it for so long, that we actually believe our own PR. And we get this totally back to front idea of morality and ethics. And so this is the process of becoming aware that the contemplative way will take us, and the second half of life journey will take us. And that's everything. Because until we become aware, no change is possible. Awareness precedes everything. He continues.
What about,
Oh, go ahead, Tony.
no, I was just going to ask you about, as you progress, you still have an ego, but I'm thinking that it's a tempered ego,
Oh, yes, absolutely.
you know?
Yeah, we can't survive as human beings without an ego. The
Right.
ego is our interface with the world, our interface with each other. And it's a way that we survive. So we need one, but it needs to be in balance. The way I put it a couple Sundays ago is that when we're in the first half of life, the ego is the boss. In the second half of life, the ego becomes an employee. It becomes a tool. It becomes a way of doing what we need to do in life, but it's not wagging the dog anymore. We have separated our identity from the ego, and egoic consciousness to this deeper self. But we realize the ego is still part of us and a necessary part of us, but we can bring the two into balance. In fact, listen to this next paragraph. He's going to talk about that. He says, the saint is precisely one who has no I to protect or project. His or her I is in conscious union with the I am of God, and that is more than enough. Remember what Jesus said, his best shot at self-identity? I and the Father are one. That's what he kept saying over and over again. This idea of that his consciousness was in union with God's consciousness, and that's more than enough. Divine union overrides any need for self-hatred or self-rejection. Such people do not need to be perfectly right, and they know they cannot be anyway. So they just try to be in right relationship. In other words, they try above all else to be loving. Love holds you tightly and safely and always. Such people have met the enemy and know that the major enemy is me, as Pogo said. But you do not hate me either. You just see through and beyond me. Shadow work literally saves you from yourself, your false self, which is the foundational meaning of salvation to begin with. And that's really important. To a Jew, salvation is spiritual liberation here and now, not being saved from the fires of hell in the afterlife, but being liberated right here and right now. Liberated from what? Liberated from the fear that Kathy was talking about, that causes us to have these thought and behavior patterns that are so dysfunctional, that causes us to sublimate the shadow because we're so afraid that it'll make us unacceptable to the rest of society around us. To be freed from all of that so that we can be our true selves, balanced in every way. That is a salvation that the Jews were understanding. And Jesus, as a Jew, and the books that we have of him written by Jews would understand salvation in that way, rather than the way that we use it. And that's really important distinction to make. He says, I am afraid that the closer you get to the light, the more of your shadow you see. Thus, truly holy people are always humble people. Christians could have been done a great service if shadow had been distinguished from sin. Sin and shadow are not the same. Okay, this is an important distinction that he's making here. Sin and shadow are not the same. Christians could have been done a great service if shadow had been distinguished from sin. So let's distinguish them and make sure we understand the difference between the two. So sin is behavior that misses the mark of unity. Okay? Sin is behavior that separates us one from another, causes us to understand ourselves as separate from one another, in competition with one another. Not because it's unlawful, but because it's separating. It's in the process of separating. Shadow is that unconscious contact, those core beliefs, those fears, those thought and behavior patterns that result from those fears are the sinful part, but the shadow itself are the unconscious causes of the sin. Does that make sense to you? It's going to be that unconscious material, those core beliefs, those values that we have that come out of our experience in life, and usually the traumas and the hurts and so on and so forth, that are now down there, and they're part of those that moral inventory that we're going to have to take now. But they're the causes of the thought and behavior patterns, the obsessive compulsive patterns in our lives. But they're not the same, because the difference is that he's going to say the church and our religious authorities have taught us so well to avoid sin that we are also avoiding shadow. And by avoiding shadow, we never get rid of the causes of our sin. Make sense? We have to engage the shadow, but we have been taught to avoid it so much, and we've conflated the two. We've made them one and the same, that we're not doing our shadow work, and it's not really ever taught in our churches, at least not recently. Did I muddy it up, or did that make sense to you?
That was a great piece, Dave, that you just said.
Okay. It's really important to It's kind of like the difference between guilt and shame. If you think of guilt as feeling bad about something you did, that would be the sin part. Shame, feeling bad about something you are, that would be more the shadow part. It's kind of like that. The next line that he says, we were so encouraged to avoid sin that many of us instead avoided facing our shadow. And then we ended up sinning even worse, while unaware besides. As Paul taught, the angels of darkness must disguise themselves as angels of light. The persona does not choose to see evil in itself, so it always disguises it as good. The shadow self invariably presents itself as something like prudence, common sense, justice, or I am doing this for your good, when it is actually manifesting fear, control, manipulation, or even vengeance. Did anyone ever tell you that the name Lucifer literally means the light bearer? The evil one always makes darkness look like light and makes light look like darkness. Now we're going to get into what we were just talking about a little bit before. Invariably, when something upsets you and you have a strong emotional reaction out of proportion to the moment, your shadow self has just been exposed. So watch for any overreactions or over denials. When you notice them, notice also that the cock of St. Peter has just crowed. That's a great allusion back to the gospel, right? Because Peter was absolutely unaware of his shadow side. Hey, I'm going to follow you no matter where you go, Jesus. I'm going to be at your side no matter what happens. This was his persona. This was his projection. This is the way he saw himself from his ego's point of view. And he was very blustery and just being Peter about it and throwing it out there. And Jesus says, hey, before the cock crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. And anyways, when the cock crows, your shadow side, your cowardice, your fear is going to be exposed. And of course, he kind of brushes it off. And at that point, he wouldn't accept that until the cock crows right after he did deny Jesus 3 times. And now everything was exposed to him and he weeps bitterly. But that was exactly the process he needed to go through. And it's exactly the process every single one of us needs to go through. It's those humiliating, right, revelations of that shadow side that give us the ability to finally start to do something about them. They have to be brought to light. We have to acknowledge them before we can make any changes.
How would a good way to do that? Go to a counselor type thing?
That can be a beginning, absolutely. But as he said, I mean, what he's saying right here is what some of you have already said. You know, I think several of you said, you know, and I said too, be watching for the things that offend you. Be watching for the things that you have resistance toward. Be watching for the things that are upsetting in one way or another. When you become defensive, when you find yourself having to justify yourself, these are all indications that your shadow is at work down there. That's not what happens to peaceful people. So, and like I said, the stone is not smooth for any one of us. So even when you think, and I had this feeling like, I thought that I had put the stake through the heart of some of my issues years ago. And then darn if that feeling doesn't crop up again. It's like, wow, really? Still? I can still feel that way? Ah, you know? And after a while, you just kind of shake your head and you got to smile. There I go again, you know? But once you are to the point where you can recognize it, at least you can take the Hippocratic Oath and first do no harm, right? You can take that breath and don't act on it, but it's still there and you can continue to work through it and work it out. You know, he says it really well. When something upsets you and you have a strong emotional reaction out of proportion to the moment, your shadow self has just been exposed. So watch for any overreactions or over denials. When you notice them, notice also that the cock of St. Peter has just crowed. The reason that a mature or saintly person can be so peaceful, so accepting of self and others, is that there is not much hidden shadow self left. There is always and forever a little more, however, no exceptions. Shadow work never stops. This denied and disguised self takes so much energy to face, awaken, and transform all one's life that you have little time to project your fear, anger, or unlived life onto terrorists, Muslims, socialists, liberals, conservatives, or even hate radio.
Something that I've kind of been looking at is a real close look at my interactions with people, and whether it's self-righteous, I feel self-righteous about them, or I am judging them, or their spiritual beliefs, religious beliefs, or political beliefs, have kind of kept me away from those people. But more recently, I've been kind of really looking at that, because I remember some stories that Ellen has been telling about her lady friends who are very traditional Christians, I take it. And your beliefs about that seem to be more broad, but it doesn't let you affect your relationship with these ladies. And you still gain so much from them, and I'm sure they have you, but you talk a whole lot about, by not having a boundary there and a more of a level of love and acceptance, you're able to get so much more. So I've kind of been trying to look at my interaction with people kind of from that perspective.
But I think I also learned, having spoken to Dave for numerous times, is, what I have to say too is, take what you need or want and leave the rest. So they gave me this social outlet and support. But even if I disagree with certain principles they have, I'm able to let it go. I can make an argument with myself, or I bring it here, actually. Because we are more liberal minded, right? So there was I'm closer to her, and we got into this discussion, and there came a point where she had to admit, I don't have all the answers. And she must have spoken with her husband, who is, and she texted me back, said, Ellen, you have an incisive mind. And yes, because I give pat answers, because I would not accept her pat answers, and she was challenged and she couldn't. I can feel the frustration, but okay. And that's how it is. Yeah.
Just so you know, Ellen, having an incisive mind is code for being annoying. That's okay.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's it.
I did annoy her because she keeps saying, oh, but da, 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 da. And anyway, it's an interpretation of one of those parables, which I disagree with, but she's more somebody who is readily accepting of what is written. I question it.
Mhm.
And I argue. So I'm not there yet. I don't. And actually, there was a discussion about Thomas, Doubting Thomas. I love Doubting Thomas. I identify with him. He questions it.
Mhm.
And I truly believe those of us who question actually have more faith, because there's another lady who has faith, and everything she says, oh yeah, but that's what it says here. That's what it says here. To me, and another one of the leaders actually said too, that yeah, you question it, but you keep showing up. I go, yes. To me, that is what faith is. I have my doubts, and yet I keep showing up. So
it sounds like what you're also saying, Ellen, is that you're kind of saying it in another way too, that you still like these women, you want to
Yes.
keep a relationship with them, and you're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You're going to just take the good and challenge the rest,
right,
but
yeah.
do both. You're kind of doing the both and thing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And also
Mhm.
notice that if there is defensiveness on the leader's part when she is being asked a question, well, that's her shadow showing, right?
Mhm.
Because she's not able to deal with what it brings up in her spirit, in herself, in her unconscious. And so that's being reflected out in that defensiveness. And that's the kind of awareness that we want to start turning on ourselves. It's easier always for us to see it in someone else. That's why an imperfect counselor can still counsel someone and be good at it, because they can see what's going on in the others, even if they can't see what's going on in themselves. They need a counselor to help them, but that's the way that works. But the more aware we get of what's happening when we're looking at everybody else's card on their forehead, the more that we're getting insight about how to see our card as well. To look at the same kind of defensiveness when it comes up in us, to be able to step out of the bubble of that emotion and say, oh, okay, here's what's going on. Here's how it connects. And then we're able to start making different choices that eventually will move us through and past that. So
And
that's
Dave,
how the process works.
I think you said before, or maybe it was in the book that Richard Rohr said it too, that there are some people that just don't do their work their entire life. And so they're just walking around, I guess, with the card on their head, and they just don't do anything about it, or don't care to know, aren't interested, don't see it, don't know what they don't know. And then I guess there's a lot of projection that goes on, that they're projecting onto other people that have to figure out, is this my stuff or is that their stuff? So there's got to be some of that too, where there are people, I know some people that just aren't interested in any kind of self-reflection or work, or just internal work or anything, that there's just no either capacity or interest or anything. It's just very interesting how they aren't. They just are who they are, and they want the world to just accept them, and they bulldoze their way through, and we have to deal. So we figure out ways to deal with boundaries and whatnot around it. So it's very interesting, but that's the world.
I'd like to add a little thought, if I may. I don't want to get too chatty here, but to reflect on what Ellen had mentioned earlier about doing the fourth step, where it says that we searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, is that we're trying to become conscious of our shadow selves. Am I correct in that that assumption?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. I think you have brought up a new aspect of that, and I sure hope that helps out.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. Most of us have not done a fourth step. We really haven't taken a look at what's down there, what's going on. And a fourth step in a 12-step, if you're doing it out of a workbook, or you do it in a couple of days and then you present it in your fifth step. But what we're talking about is a lifelong process of peeling the onion, of getting further and further down into that shadow material, because it never is going to be completely purged. There's always going to be something left, as Richard Rohr just said. The stone will never really be smooth. But we get to a point where it really doesn't matter anymore in terms of our daily interactions and our ability to truly love others and choose for the good of the group that's being affected by our choices. We get to a place where what's left doesn't matter. As he says, these people who have become saints are the ones who really don't have much shadow work left. The I really is, the egoic I really is connected with everything and everyone else, including God's presence. And in terms of our relationships, it's I guess a distinction without a difference. But we know that there is still more, even when we think we're evolved beyond it. And then we get that spike of emotion again, and we realize, okay, yeah, there's that stuff is still down there. And then we just kind of laugh at ourselves and move forward. But it is a lifelong process. That step 4 is something that we'll constantly be doing as we're continuing to go deeper into the second half of life. And as he's going to point now on page 134, it also has to do with the positive shadow. There's not just a negative shadow, there's also a positive shadow that also gets sublimated. Remember when we were doing the Robert Johnson book, and he told us that as we were growing up as kids, we learned first from our own household what was acceptable and what was not. And what was not acceptable, we learned to hide, we learned to sublimate, we learned to repress and push down into shadow. But some of those things were positive things that we are going to need, and to express our full selves, we need to have those also brought up into the light and to be balanced into our whole selves. because some of those were our strengths that presented as a kid as annoyances, just like Helen's questioning is annoying to the leader who wants to present a monolithic vision to her group here. But that persistence of Ellen is a strength that she has, just as it was with doubting Thomas. It was a strength that he had in order to actually express these things. But since it wasn't acceptable to the house, that gets pushed down. That's our inner goal that he's going to talk about in this next paragraph. And that also gets projected onto others. Those people that we idolize, those people that we admire, those people that we are in awe of, we're seeing those parts of ourselves that we have sublimated. And by projecting it onto them, then we don't have to bring them out ourselves. And what we need to do is to recognize that as well and start exercising that untapped potential, if you will. Let's read how he puts it. As the shadows of things continue to show themselves, shadow even in the physical universe is created by an admixture of light, of darkness and light. You lose interest in idealizing or idolizing persons or events, especially yourself. You no longer give away your inner gold to others. You keep yours and you let them keep theirs. So this inner gold is the positive shadow we're talking about. The highest value of our psyche, the highest value of our soul, this untapped potential that we then project on others. I remember when I first started working in Mexico with a nonprofit organization, the leader who had a lot of good insight, he said it really annoyed him when people said, "Thank God you're doing the work that you do." Because what he was basically recognizing is that, thank God you're doing what you do so I don't have to do it. That was basically the subtext that's going on there, and he was just cantankerous enough and New York enough to be able to say, well, thank you for that. And what are you doing? But that's the projection of this thing that we admire in somebody else so that it absolves us from having to do it ourselves. This would be giving away your inner gold, what he's talking about, We lose interest in idealizing or idolizing persons or events or even ourselves. We no longer give away our inner gold to others. You keep yours and you let them keep theirs. That does not mean that you stop loving other people. In fact, it means you actually start. It does not mean self-hatred or self-doubt, but exactly the contrary, because you finally accept both your gold and your weaknesses as your own, and they no longer cancel each other out. You can finally do the same for others too. You do not let one or another fault in a person destroy your larger relationship. Sounds like Ellen, right? With her group, right? Here you understand the absolute importance of contemplative or non-dualistic thinking, which we will talk about in a bit. The gift of shadow boxing is in the seeing of the shadow and its games, which takes away much of the shadow's hidden power. No wonder that Teresa of Avila said that the mansion of true self-knowledge was the necessary first mansion. Once you have faced your own hidden or denied self, there is not much to be anxious about anymore, because there is no fear of exposure to yourself or others. The game is over, and you are free. You have now become the holy fool of legend and story, which Paul seems to say is the final stage. When there is no longer any persona to protect or project, you finally are who you are and can be who you are without disguise or fear. And of course, all of this is going to create a depression and a sadness as you go through it, which is what he's going to talk about in the last 2 pages. We got a few minutes left. Let me just read these last 2 pages so we can complete this thought. We can come back to it next week if we want to expand it a little bit more. He says there will always be some degree of sadness, humiliation, and disappointment resulting from shadow work. So it's best to learn to recognize it and not obsess over it. It is the false self that is sad and humbled because its game is over. So it's your ego that's going to feel this depression, feel this sadness, this disorientation, this disturbance from doing this work. Not your true self, but your egoic self. Holy sadness, once called compunction, and compunction is remorse or guilt that we feel over something that we've done that was disruptive, right? Holy sadness is the price your soul pays for opening to the new and the unknown in yourself and in the world. A certain degree of such necessary sadness, another form of necessary suffering, is important to feel, to accept, and to face. In our work with men, we have found that in many men, this inability or refusal to feel their deep sadness takes the form of aimless anger. The only way to get to the bottom of their anger is to face the ocean of sadness underneath it. Men are not free to cry, so they just transmute their tears into anger, and sometimes it pools up in their soul in the form of real depression. Anger is a top-level emotion. It's always the effect of some deeper cause. And so when you feel anger, you know that something else is driving it. In this case, he's talking about this sadness. Men are actually encouraged to deny their shadow self in any competitive society. So we all end up with a lot of sad and angry old men. Men are capable of so much more if they will only do some shadow boxing. But let me distinguish good and necessary sadness from some forms of depression. Many depressed people are people who have never taken any risks, never moved outside their comfort zone, never faced necessary suffering. And so their unconscious knows that they have never lived or loved. Now we're talking about what Kathy was talking about, right? Some people who get to the end, their elder years, and they haven't done any of these things, and they don't even seem interested in doing them. It is not the same as necessary sadness, although it can serve that function. I am afraid that a large percentage of people in their later years are merely depressed or angry. What an unfortunate way to live out one's final years. One of the great surprises is that humans come to full consciousness precisely by shadowboxing, facing their own contradictions and making friends with their own mistakes and failings. People who have had no inner struggles are invariably both superficial and uninteresting. We tend to endure them more than communicate with them because they have little to communicate. Shadow work is almost another name for falling upward. Lady Julian put it best of all. First, there is the fall, and then we recover from the fall. Both are the mercy of God.
I was just,
Yeah,
well,
go
I was
ahead.
just thinking, some people who don't have the insight, like for me in my case, so I can see it where I don't have the insight or I don't know my faults or I'm in denial. But it would help if somebody points it out to me and I go, what? I never knew. That would have helped, maybe saved 5-7 years of shadow work of self-reflection.
I think
And
it's
if someone had told you that 5 or 7 years ago, Helen, would you have
Maybe.
accepted it?
That's true. I may have been defensive and
Yeah.
what? No, that's not right.
Yeah.
No, because I was
think
just meaning
it's
to.
virtually impossible to do this stuff alone, right? Because we
Right.
got to offend people to know that we have a different perspective. We have a different, you gotta. Yeah, I think what Tony was talking about earlier, like this, doing some self-reflective work and recognizing, your own blind spots, essentially, like that's part of it. But the other part of it is that you have to see how you rub up against other people.
Other people, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Amen. We got to come out of mom's basement eventually, right?
Right. No, because there's this, in step 4, it says, and John is familiar, it says here, search me, God, know my heart, test me and know my anxious thoughts, see if there's any offensive way in me. So I keep saying that for a couple of years, but not until you're in a community. I said, search me, God, but then I'm saying it's all self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
There's still that protective denial wall.
Yeah.
But somebody, he has to send a messenger, right? Otherwise, it's all just self-talk.
So this all goes well, Dave, to your theory of staying well connected to others.
Right.
We can't do it alone, right?
It's
We
all
live in
about
a vacuum
connection.
otherwise.
Absolutely. There's an ancient saying that says one Christian is no Christian. And I got my head handed to me by someone, I can't remember who it was, who didn't like that saying, but the Was that you, buddy?
Tony.
Yes, it was.
It's Tony. He didn't like that saying, but the point is that the only way Christianity is lived out is in community. I mean, that was the whole point. It has to be in community, exactly what William is saying, because love needs a beloved. Love needs an object. And without the object, why is there a Trinity and not just one God? Because there has to be a community. It's the whole point of this, right? And so, yes, absolutely what William is saying. We can start the process of awareness in contemplation in our solitude, but the only way that we can know that any progress is being made is in community. It has to be in community. So, yes.
Mhm.
Right?
All right. Hey, we made some tracks today. This was good. And we threw John into the deep end of the pool and he floated. So I'm really happy to see that. All is well. All right, let's wrap it up and then we'll hit it again for 2 more weeks and see how far we get. And where is, oh, there he is, Scotty. Scotty, over to you, buddy.
Father God, thank you for always being here wherever here is, whether we're in meeting or in conflict or in loving situations. We can always count on you to participate if we'll take a time to tune into you, your instruction through your Holy Spirit. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your guidance, your direction, your inspiration, and the peace that comes from knowing you are the truth that sets us free. It's in your holy and precious name, Lord Jesus, that we pray and we give our thanks and say our amens. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right, everybody, good night. And see you hopefully
Good
Sunday.
night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye,
Night, guys.
Jordana.
Bye,
My best to
William.
your mom, Jordana.
I
Take
will.
good
She's doing a
care.
lot better though. She's doing
Oh,
a lot
that's
better.
good. I'm
Oh,
glad to hear
fantastic.
that.
Thanks, Jordana. Thanks for telling
Good to
me.
You're
hear
welcome.
that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if me and Ron are gonna be there on Saturday because he's still really sick and I'm sick now. So I don't know if we're gonna be there on Sunday, Dave.
Yeah, he told me. We'll wait and see how it goes.
Okay. Well, I just
Okay.
wanted to let you know in case you didn't know. I didn't know if you knew or not. So I just
Yeah,
wanted to
we've
let
been
you
in
know.
pretty good contact for the last few days. So,
Well, if we're not there on Sunday, I will stream it. So let your lovely wife know.
I
So
will
she
do
can
it.
say something to me.
Okay.
Love you
We'll
guys.
We'll shout out to you, dear.
Okay. Love you
All
guys.
right. Good night,
Bye.
everybody.
Hi, David. See, I won't see you Sunday.
Oh, man, see how you are?
It's the first Sunday of the month.
All right. You have a good time wherever you are, my
I
friend.
will be with you in spirit.
And thanks for being with us tonight. That was really great.
My
Bye,
pleasure.
Linda. Bye,
Okay.
Dave.
Good night,
Bye.
Linda. Good night, everybody.